Hi, everyone. This is Rachel Krensman, and I'm really excited today to be interviewing one of my favorite people on the planet. This is Marc Zegans. He's a working poet and a creative development advisor, and he's been doing this for over 20 years. But the reason I wanted to talk to Marc tonight was really to share our journey together. He helped me immensely in the development of writing and working on my memoir over the last 15 years or so. So welcome, Marc. Thank you for coming and talking a little bit about our journey.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. It's really a pleasure to be here. And congratulations on the book coming out. It's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much. It was quite a long process. As I mentioned, I started writing a long time ago, and I started writing it with Marc. He really helped me from the inception of the book. I had the idea, but I had no idea how to go about it. And I didn't know if I would finish it. We've had a lot of moments where I wasn't sure if I would continue writing. I really relied a lot on Marc's advice in terms of how to develop the story.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process. When we began, you knew you had something that you wanted to say, but it was almost like you didn't even know if you had permission to say it. And we traveled a long journey where you discovered, what's the arc of my story? What does it mean for me? What can I share with people that would be meaningful to them? And I think one of the big things that you really developed a great skill for was to learn how to write as a gift for others. And that comes across beautifully in As Is. It's really wonderful to see that, because you see a person who's moved from genuine trauma to successive versions of herself and true healing, and ultimately to be in a place where she understands herself and her relationship to the world in a way that she can really be a gift to others. And that's really a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much. I feel very touched. It's still very vulnerable for me to share my story. I
Yeah.
always was writing, but I didn't quite know how to bring it together. And you helped me actually with a lot of things before the book. We met really to talk about business. Marc also is a fantastic business consultant, but mostly in the area of creativity. So it was really great to work with you because it wasn't just like talking to a business consultant. You taught me how to dream my life or envision my life rather than just looking at numbers and tasks. So I really felt seen by you. I felt heard, and you helped me figure out what I want to do with my life. You help me connect with my body, which is something that I do intuitively as a yoga therapist, a somatic therapist, which nobody has ever done in the realm of business. So I just loved working with you, and I wanted to share your advice and input with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, it was fun working with you on your business, because you weren't someone who was just driven for numbers and very rigid about her thinking. You wanted to create something that really resonated for you and that was part of a fuller life. And I really love doing that with you and with people, helping them see what their dreams are, what their capabilities are. And then also, because we've worked for a very long time together, how those things change. It relates completely to the work I do with creative artists and performers and things like that.
I think it's a very unique profession. Maybe just tell us a little bit about how you got into this.
So I got into it in an interesting way. I used to run a program at Harvard's Kennedy School called the Innovations Program, which kind of looked at best practice, did research on it, and taught about it. And I used to teach a course on innovation at Harvard. And I found, while I was teaching the course, I would get these mid career students and then some senior executive students who had enormous challenges that they were facing and no way to think through it. And so they'd come to my office hours, and we'd end up having these long and very interesting and extremely challenging conversations about how they could meet those demands. And I realized that was really what my forte was. It was my gift, more than getting up and lecturing or things like that. And I continued to work at the Kennedy School for a while. And then I, at fairly young, found out that I had cancer. And I had a 2-year-old boy, and I had to really rethink what's my life here and what do I want to give to my son? Because at that point, I didn't know how long I'd live. And fortunately, I got over it and lived a long life. But with that came two decisions. One was that I wanted to put my own creative life front and center as a poet. And the second one was that I wanted to take these tools that I'd learned about innovation and creativity and strategic management and bring them into the world of the arts, because there's very little of that available to arts organizations and even less available to writers and artists and musicians. So I made a decision to start doing that a good many years ago, and that's been my path ever since.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm going to ask a few questions about our process.
Sure.
My first question is that during our early phases of our work together, you encouraged me to see writing the memoir as a gift to myself. And after I'd written a couple of drafts, you encouraged me in my rewrites to see it as a gift to my audience. Why did you ask me to view it in these two different ways as my memoir progressed?
So the reason I asked you to view it that way in the first instance was because we were dealing with a very difficult set of stories about overcoming trauma and also exiting the culture which you came from, which was a very strict, rigorous, orthodox background and a very judgmental community. And so one of the big issues that came up for you was, do I even have permission to write this? And the
Yeah.
second issue that came up for you was, can I show it to anyone? What can I say about this? What do I do? And do I have to censor what I'm writing? And your need to write was important. And censoring what you were doing would hurt you and your potential reader. Whereas writing it out just for yourself and then later making decisions about what you wanted to share and why, once you'd given it to yourself as a gift with love, was the most important thing. And that meant that as we worked through it, we had to explore very carefully what were the wounds, what were the good things, what freed you, what held you back, what were the challenges you had to overcome, and how could you write about this for yourself so that you would see that and begin to find the meaning in it as you look back. The second question of giving it as a gift to the audience is, when we write memoirs, we're trying to communicate something that has meaning. It's about an episode or series of episodes in our life in which we make a transition that has deeper meaning for us and from which others can learn. And if we just write it for ourselves, two things happen. One is that the book tends to be just chronology. This happened and this happened, which is tedious for a reader who doesn't know you. And it also doesn't get to the heart of the story. And so what once you really had the story out there and had a sense of what this means to me and where am I in my life, then you could go back and take that material and reshape it so that the whole narrative is about the heart of the story. And I think you just did that remarkably in what you ended up publishing.
Thank you so much. I remember that there was a main arc, and then there were a lot of sub arcs and sub stories in there. And a lot of it emerged through the process. It wasn't there in the beginning.
One of the things that happens is, and this happened definitely with you, and it happens with a lot of writers, is they want to get right to the point. And that's because this is challenging work and it's painful and it's demanding. And what really makes the story rich is when you find these moments in those early drafts where there's another story within a story, or there's a character who matters to you, or there's a piece of business that you haven't dealt with because you're dealing with other pieces and it comes back later. And this is true for all of us as human beings as we go through life. And what a really good memoirist does, and that you are, is they find a way to tease out those smaller stories, relate them to the bigger one, and create a weave or a braid that travels through the book.
Yes. I remember in relationship to this that early on I was pretty anxious because I didn't want to hurt people in my family. How did you help me get through that?
I think that was something we kept coming back to. We did different things at different times, but I think the first thing that we did was I remember we had several conversations about this, was that there's a very big difference between trying to hurt somebody and going after somebody for the purpose of revenge and telling a painful truth, which they may or may not take as hurtful in the first instance. And that your first job was to find a way to tell the truth as you see it. And the second job was to realize that this was just your truth, that she might have a very different understanding or version of things. And so that was where we began. And then over time, and you expressed this really nicely in the book, we began to explore who your mother was as a person, what her wounds and injuries were, what her limitations were. And so in the process of that, she became less of a figure and more of a person. And I think that gave you an opportunity to write as you saw, to hold your mother in some sense accountable for the things that hurt you, but to see the world she came from and what she was able to do. As that unfolded, we began to see not just the hurt, but the love on both sides.
Yeah, it was definitely a difficult process, and it did open up a lot of lines of communication eventually, but it took me many years to get there.
Yeah, it was a hard story. I think also what kind of froze it was the situation with your dad was so shocking and so challenging that it set up a kind of rigid characterization. This was my dad. This is my mom. This is what they did. And over time, as you softened toward them, you began to develop them more as individual characters. So it was less about a structure and more about relationships.
Yeah, I remember it was hard for me to find a shape and a stopping point for my story. That was a tough point because while I was writing, I didn't really have the resolution that I needed to finish the story. I wasn't sure when the story would be finished. And you encouraged me to be patient. You encouraged me to see it through to a good conclusion. Can you talk about why this was important and how you helped me do that?
Oh, sure. That's a challenging one, but I'll do my best. When you got to Israel and you were working in the very late stages of the process, you had come to Israel with a dream about what it would be and what your life would be there. And when you got there, you confronted a very different reality. It was a reality that you wanted to embrace. You wanted to be there with family. It was a place you wanted to be. But now it was becoming real. It wasn't a narrative that you had in your head. And so you were in a bit of confusion about what is this? Where does this go? What do I say? What's the lesson here? And before you went to Israel, your sort of idea was, oh, I'm going to finish the memoir, getting to Israel, and everything's going to be great. And then we realized together, wait a second, there's another chapter to the story. And in a lot of ways, it's having a child where you have a fantasy of who your child's going to be, and then you have a real child, and you have to deal with that and learn about it and love this actual thing. And that's what happened, I think, with you in Israel and with your family and your relations there. And it was in coming to that that you were able to finish the arc of your memoir, that story, and to open up the arc of the story of who you are now, having made that transition fully.
Yeah, hard to know where the memoir ends because there's so much more to come. But there was a point where it felt finished in a way.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's true. And there's a big difference, I think, and not everybody gets this, between memoir and autobiography. Memoir is about my remembering a series of things that happened that led to a deeper insight, that caused a change in me, that healed the wound or a set of wounds. Autobiography is about saying, here are all the great things I did right up until the end. And
Mm.
it's a different kind of book because autobiography is a lot more about setting up a history. Memoir is much more about an evolution in the spirit. And I think that's why, even though the story goes on, you came to a very natural and entirely believable ending point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I see it as the memoir tells can tell just a moment or a part of your life. It doesn't have to be a story from beginning to end.
Exactly. It can't be. And if it tries to be, that's when you begin to lose the thread. And it takes some courage to say stop, just as much as it takes courage to say go, saying, okay, this is the point where it feels done, where it feels full. It takes courage to do that. And you absolutely displayed it in bringing the book out.
Yeah, I would say it does take a lot of courage, and I don't think I would have been able to do it without your help. So I'll take a moment to just offer my gratitude to you for being a real guide and an inspiration. And when I thought that, who cares? Nobody wants to read about this story. You kept me going, kept me focused. And it wasn't just a story. So I just want to ask you one final question because I've never quite met anyone like you who works the way you do. And it worked very well for me and has been a huge part of my process. So I found that it was unusual. You didn't try to force me into any kind of frame, but you spent a lot of time getting to know me, know who I am, know what I need. And it was a very different way than I'd experienced with other coaches. It turned business coaching on its head, I would say. Because it wasn't business, it was creative. There were so many different aspects to the way you worked with me. So I want to know what your approach is, where it comes from, and why you think that this is the best way to work with people.
I don't know if it's the best way to work with people, but I think it's a good way to work with a lot of people. The approach comes from two simple ideas, really. I'll start with business because that's where we started and then talk about personal development. So, the way that I look at business and the way that I look at our larger economy is that it's meant to help people live well, to live the lives of their own choosing, and to do the things that matter for them. And that's true of everybody involved in the business. The business's customers, its clients, the people who work in the business, the owners and managers of the business, the people that supply things to the business. And so if we orient making a business around the idea that we are helping people thrive and shine, whatever it is, whether you're making auto parts or whether you're running a yoga studio like you did, if we think about business in those very human terms and remember that a business's function and an economy's function is not to serve itself, but it's to serve the world. And what happens is tools like discounting cash flows back, figuring out marketing strategies, figuring out what our production lines are, those things become tools that are in service of a larger mission, as opposed to simply just being a set of constraints that we have to live by and hoops we have to jump through. And it's interesting because in Buddhism, there's a similar idea, which is one of the reasons that Buddhist thought encourages business is because it's a way to do things that's a substitute for war. That we talk with each other, we make contracts, we make deals, we offer services, we receive exchange for what we've offered. So that's the business story. The story about working with people and helping them move in the direction of their dreams and adapt their practices and behavior to do that, whether it's in business or in writing a novel or acting on stage or what may be, is that we all have tremendous potential. And oftentimes the potential is locked up by social stigma, emotional constraints, the old wounds that we adapted to at the time, but those adaptations no longer serve us. And oftentimes because we're censored and stifled by the people around us. And so I wanted to think of a way where I could work with people who really had something to say or something to do in the world that mattered to them and to step by step get to know them. How do you learn? What matters to you? What's scary for you? What's exciting for you? Where do you feel strong? Where do you feel weak? And from that place, begin to work together to discover what your potential is. Or if you've maxed out on something and now you need to take a new turn, how to take that term in a way that's alive and true to you. And so that's how I worked. I think what really interested me was seeing people move in the world as themselves and thrive as they were and realize that potential they began to imagine or that came to them as a gift from outside. And in that context, we look at wounds and trauma very differently in the work that we do. These are just things that we work with and we play with and we creatively investigate and use as we meet the world as we're growing. And so an image I always have is because I live down in the Monterey Bay Area. We're famous for these Monterey cypress trees, which are very beautiful. And the way they grow is they adapt into these beautiful and entirely unpredictable shapes in response to the environment, the ocean winds hitting them, the winter storms, the fire seasons, and things like that. And so I see our growth that way, that we have scars and wounds and things we need to work through. But it's not just about restoring ourselves to some kind of balance. It's about fully living life and doing things that we previously never could have even imagined.
So, by saying this, you're in essence saying that our wounds can be our greatest gift.
Yes, absolutely.
That's one of the messages of my book, actually, that sometimes I remember feeling like, why did this happen to me? Or I would never have chosen for this to happen. Or why did I have these difficult things that occurred in my life? And when it shapes who you are, it's hard to imagine yourself without it.
Yes. Oh, yeah, exactly. And also give you permission to do things that the world that surrounded you couldn't even allow or consider. There's this one moment in your book. I just love this. It's when you're in San Diego and you've started acting and you decide you're going to write a play. And you just give yourself permission to go do this thing and you write it and you launch it and you do it. And it's absolutely amazing. And there was nothing in the permission structure and the structure of meaning you grew up in Montreal that ever would have allowed you to step out and do it. And it's just brilliant breakthrough moment. So yeah,
Thank you. If there's one thing that you could advise people who are embarking on an artistic journey, whether it's writing music or writing a memoir or any other creative work, what would it be?
I think it's that your voice matters, that we all have something to say and share, and finding what that is, and then having the will to act on that is going to open up the world for you in ways you couldn't possibly imagine.
Well, thank you so much. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
They can go to my website, which is mycreativedevelopment.com. And there's a little questionnaire you can fill out there and explain what you want to be in touch with and what you want to work about.
It's always just warms my heart to be with you. And it's a 17-year relationship that I realized started a long time ago with a little back pain, if I recall.
Oh, this is true. Yes.
That's how I met you and developed into really a lifelong professional and personal relationships. So just thank you so much. I feel that I couldn't have done this without you. I couldn't have released my book. I wouldn't have had the confidence. I wouldn't have had the freedom for it to be my book, for it to really be mine and my voice. And I just couldn't be more grateful for everything you've done to help me get to this point. Thank you.
It's been a joy working with you. My favorite thing was when the copy of your book came to me and I opened it and started reading it in its published version. I just said, "This is Rachel. This is you." And that was beautiful. Anyway, it's been a wonderful 17 years. And thank you.